Hello, everyone. I'm Alan Potcotter, and you're listening to Call Talk for April 5th, 2023. Today's topic is hiring CSRs, latest on security, screening, and drug testing. If you're listening live, we invite you to be part of the show and ask questions. Here's how you do it. You can email me at calltalk@benchmarkportal.com. I want to remind everyone that all of our shows are archived and available to listen to at Benchmark Portal any time of the day. And now with that, I would like to introduce the host of the show, Bruce Belfiore.
Thank you, Alan, and welcome back to Call Talk, everyone. As Alan mentioned, today we'll be talking about a hot topic, hiring CSRs, the latest on security screening and drug testing. I'm interviewing Christine Cunin, president of Higher Image, a nationally accredited background and drug testing company. She's the former chairperson of the Professional Background Screening Association and is still actively involved. Christine is a frequent speaker on background and drug testing trends and insights throughout the country. Welcome back to the show. It's great having you back, Christine. You were here a couple of years ago, and we're looking forward to your updates.
Well, thanks for having me, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be back with you on the show.
Okay, great. Well, let's start with drug testing and the legalization of marijuana. What do employers need to know at this point in time?
Well, I will say this is definitely the hot topic these days. So from medical marijuana to recreational marijuana to when you can test, how you can test, what you can test, the laws really do vary by jurisdiction. So employers and hiring managers have to be extremely careful, especially if you're a multi-state employer and there is no one-size-fits-all drug testing process anymore, like there used to be years ago. So I suspect this is an area that we're going to see an increase in litigation because of all the laws, and they're different in every jurisdiction. So it's unclear for employers like how to keep up with everything. Right now, we're tracking through our Professional Background Screening Association 51 pending bills at the state legislatures related to testing for marijuana. So I suspect even more laws coming your way. And what I really recommend for employers right now is just look at your substance abuse policies, right? Likely if you haven't updated it in the recent past, like within the last year or so, it's likely out of date and needs some updating. And I really feel like it makes sense to have a policy with addendums to account for the state and local testing laws.
Okay, so just tell us a little bit more about what you mean by addendums on your policy.
So when I say have addendums, it's really just have one central policy that covers kind of the generalized area of drug testing, and then the addendums to have for every state you're in. So if you're in Arizona, have an Arizona addendum. If you're in California, have a California addendum. So really just like a state-by-state addendum. And then just to kind of let you know on what's going on at some of the state and local areas with that, if you're currently in New York, New Jersey, Montana, Rhode Island, Nevada, Philadelphia, you should not be testing for marijuana as you're hiring folks. So do not test for marijuana as part of your pre-employment screening process. And then we also have Washington, D.C. starting July 13th, 2023, and then California starts January 2024. And you might think, oh, well, it's automatically going to be taken out of my testing. It doesn't automatically happen. So if you're in those jurisdictions, make sure you're talking to your providers and you're not testing for marijuana. Really important. And then what I would also like to add, Bruce, there is I know a lot of the, contact centers, call centers, they have contracts with their clients, and the clients dictate what they do for background checks and drug testing. So if you're in one of those jurisdictions and you're required to test and include marijuana testing, you might want to go back to those contracts and amend them or talk to your clients because you don't want to be afoul of the law in those jurisdictions.
Wow, okay, that's a lot to have on your plate. So, Christine, are you seeing a lot of employers just removing the marijuana testing altogether?
We definitely are seeing a trend. It's kind of the easier route, right? So you're not running afoul of any laws. Just take out the THC or marijuana testing from your drug test. But we're not seeing that, obviously, with safety-sensitive positions or federally regulated positions. So because they're required to do it, or safety-sensitive, there could be some workplace safety issues. But a lot of contact centers have contracts with their customers that have that specific testing. So again, you want to just make sure you're checking first and before you just start removing it altogether.
Gotcha. Okay. So if you have a federal contract, then it could be that the federal regulations will trump the state ones, but there might be a little bit of uncertainty there. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a great question, Bruce, because it's federally regulated, like talking about people driving trucks and FAA, flying airplanes. But with federal contracts, it's a little nuanced. There was a case out of Connecticut, actually, with a medical marijuana case. And they said, oh, well, I'm a federal contractor, so I can still test and hold that against somebody if they tested positive for marijuana. And that federal court in Connecticut ruled by the way of the applicant. So you got to be really careful. It's not just cut and dry, black and white, as far as drug testing and a federal contract. So.
Well, that's wonderful. It really makes life simpler, doesn't it?
Not easy.
Bureaucracy. Yes, exactly. Bureaucracy is going to bury us all, particularly when it's not even all in the same direction. Well, that's really good to know, though. Is there anything else our listeners should know about drug testing before we move on?
Well, I mean, we could probably talk the full time here on just drug testing, but I just want to mention a couple of things, right? So recently, we actually had a situation with one of our contact centers. They're in multi-state, but they opened a new location in Nevada. And they're used to using those instant oral tests just to move it along fast. Well, They weren't allowed to use that in Nevada. They run afoul of the law, so they prohibit you from doing instant tests in the state of Nevada. And there's other states like that as well. So what I'll tell you is just don't think you can go into another city, another state, and have the same process as, where your current location is. Just be really careful of that. And again, I can't reiterate enough to really look at your substance abuse policy and really get those updated. And then, just also to mention, Bruce, we are hosting a webinar on compliance in the age of marijuana on June 7th of this year. And I could share the details with you and your team. And I know if those that are listening after this live show will also have a recording of it too, so people can get access, and that will be a full hour of the fun we have with marijuana.
I like the way you put that. The fun we have with marijuana. Okay, toward the end of it, do you get the munchies? Anyway.
Exactly. I have been known to hand out chips when I do public speaking in person.
Oh, that's a kick. Okay, that's good. So that could be a great resource for some people who want to go into more detail. So if it's before you're listening to this before June 7th, 2023, you can listen to it live, and otherwise you can go to Christine's website and see about getting the link to the recorded show. So that's good. So in that case of the folks in Nevada, you were able to keep them out of trouble, or did they get into trouble?
No, we had an active meeting going on with them just to go over things, and when they brought that up, we were able to get them to stop doing that before anybody else found out about it. So
okay, good.
They're on the they've been reduced.
Better to be safe than sorry. That's great. Okay, so how about the security screening side of things? Let's move over there. What's the latest on that score?
Yeah, well, that's also pretty busy. So our legislators and the courts in this area continue to challenge us. So, and there's a couple main points I just want to hit in this area. So let's start with ban the box or fair chance laws. So by now, you probably all know ban the box. What does that mean? It just simply means taking that initial question off the application where you say, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Just take that box off. Hopefully all of you have by now, because most states have laws that you can't have it on. So that's how the laws started out, right? Just take that question off. And there's currently 18 states with some form of ban the box, and many more cities and even some counties with additional laws. But what we're seeing now, that in addition to the new jurisdictions passing laws related to these fair chance and hiring initiatives, we're seeing many jurisdictions who previously passed laws now going back and making their laws even stronger. So, for example, Hawaii was the first state in the country to pass a ban the box law, and that was back in '98. But now, back in 2020, they amended it to further limit what information an employer can actually consider. And then in Illinois is another example. They passed their ban the box law in 2015, but now in 2021, they amended it to require employers to determine the relationship of the crime to the position sought. So there's currently 19 active bills in local legislatures related to these fair chance initiatives. So I'll just tell folks, don't feel like you know the answers because it's constantly changing.
Well, and this is really a jeopardy type of situation, because if you say that in the case of Illinois, for instance, in 2021, they amended it to require employers to determine the relationship of the crime to the position sought. I mean, wow. So they have to be the arbiter of that. And what if, sometime down the road, some judge decides that they got it wrong? I mean, even if they did their best faith effort, if the judge says they got it wrong, they could still be in jeopardy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it is definitely a murky area. The EEOC has guidance on factors to consider for assessing criminal records, so they have kind of a checklist.
Okay.
But all these state laws, sometimes they throw in different ones, and yeah, it's really hard for you, the employer, to know exactly what to use and how to use it. So you just got to be really careful. Talk to your in-house counsel.
Okay, they do provide you, however, with at least a checklist to sort of determine. It's sort of like if somebody a W-2 or 1099. There is a checklist that they provide at least to help you try to reduce the amount of jeopardy you could get into. Is that correct?
Well, some do, some don't. So it just I kind of point to the EEOC guidelines as a helpful tool. So I'm happy to share that with you and your folks if you need it after the show. And then, kind of further to the Fair Chance initiatives, Bruce, there's what are now called the clean slate laws. And this is kind of more recent type of legislation that we're seeing. And it's kind of an expansive record clearing legislation, just kind of wiping out the criminal records of folks. So basically they're looking at certain level of offenses, maybe so long ago, just kind of wiping them out so that an employer can't hold that against someone. So right now there's 10 states with these clean slate laws, and we're seeing a lot more in this area. But there's folks that are advocating for it. So, and hopefully nobody on this webinar is relying solely on multi-jurisdictional database searches, because if you do, you have to be aware some of those records are getting automatically expunged. And if you're relying on those databases and they're not cleaning that data or giving you the most up-to-date data, you could get in trouble. And I do see a lot of contact centers that try to do that quick, easy background check. So be careful on that. Definitely want to stress that. But these laws, they have great intentions, but with any governmental agency, I worry about the process of clearing those records and ensuring that the wrong ones are not removed. So that's an area to be really paying attention to there.
So, I do. So with regard to the multi-jurisdictional database searches, are those government entities that are doing that, or these are private sector companies that are doing that?
Yeah, great question. It's private sector companies. There's a lot of them out there that you can just buy those database searches, and even companies. If you're using your background screening company as the provider, they might have access to those. I just tell people don't rely on that. We use it as a tool as well, but not the only search. You want to check with the primary source of those criminal records to make sure they haven't been expunged, because that's when you, the employer, will get into some trouble.
Okay, because you'd expect that those private sector companies would realize that they are liable. They're taking on liability if they don't do it right. But I know some of them are not all that well, not that big and well structured. So
no, you got to look at the fine print. It tells you don't rely on this for final decision. They have it all caveated out that don't rely on it for a final decision. So be careful there. And then the other area I would tell folks that's kind of the hot area is, and I'm sure well aware of it, is pay transparency and salary disclosures. So again, another well-intentioned area to help fix the gender wage gap, that we've been seeing, but it might cause some other issues related to your screening process. So be careful of that. So when can you verify your prior salary history in addition to posting salary bands in your job posting? So just kind of be aware of that. Are you doing that process correctly with your background screening provider, or are you in-house? Right now there's 6 new jurisdictions that passed legislation in 2022, and we see 17 pending bills right here in 2023 for this area. So be careful of that.
Wow. Okay. Any specific sort of stories to tell or tips to give with regard to this?
What I would tell folks is, not related to background check, but make sure you're, if you're asking on your job application, don't be asking what the prior salary history is. Take that off. A lot of some of the legislation, if you're in certain states, allows you to ask about the salary history post-offer. So you still can ask during the background screening process. You just got to be really careful of the when you're asking. But the salary bands area too, New York City is actually going back and looks like they're amending what they're doing because folks are getting like, oh, it could be anywhere from $0 to $250,000. So employers were starting to get a little creative and saying, I'm not going to give you, a range of $10,000 of the pay scale. I'm going to make it really broad. So those states are going, or cities are going back and changing those laws as well. So you got to be really careful to follow the bouncing ball of changing legislation.
Okay, great. The bouncing ball it is. So it sounds like a lot's happened in the screening industry. The clean slate area sounds really interesting and challenging. And can you explain what you mean with your worry about the process for clearing these records?
Yeah, I really do worry about this area. So while, we're relying on governmental agency to follow what the law that passed said, hey, expunge all these records that are, say, over 10 years old or are just a minor, drug possession, maybe someone possessed marijuana. So, get rid of those records. And the reason, I'll give you an example. There's one in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was the first state to implement the Clean Slate Law back in 2018. And just this past November, there was an investigative report. And what they revealed is some records that are no longer available that should be. So, and notably, it was Franklin County, Pennsylvania. 80% of all the criminal cases that were removed, and it included rape, murder, they just removed the cases. So they're not available, which is awful. Pennsylvania is currently working to address it to get those records back in there, but isn't that worrisome of what is going to be erased when you leave it in the hands of those governmental agencies? So again, well-intentioned, but maybe not implemented correctly. So that's what I worry about there.
That is worrisome, very scary. If they can't handle the implementation, why are these government entities continuing to pass the laws?
Well, we can get into a whole conversation on just politics alone, right? But although the intentions are good, there's usually, those unintended consequences. So the Fair Chance Initiatives, Clean Slate Acts, they're really aimed at helping to build an effective diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, right, which everyone's working towards. And as studies have showed that African American, Latino males, they're more likely to be incarcerated than white males. So it disproportionately affects their opportunities. So with that, that's why, they're passing these laws, right? But there's fewer employer incentives, and I'm a fan of give employers incentives to hire folks like this rather than punishing. So right now we got the federal work opportunity tax credit, the federal bonding program, and in my opinion, that's just not enough, and so it doesn't give folks enough incentive to hire folks like that. But wouldn't it be great if the government, instead of finding punishments for employers, found incentives? I mean, wouldn't that be a great thing for business?
Gotcha. Okay, so there might be a little less on the regulations and rules and laws side and a little more on the incentive side. Interesting approach. No, you've really thought this through very well, Christine. Do you have any ideas for the incentives or increased incentives?
Yeah, I can't say as I'm a policy expert, so I can't say as I have any exactly, but and we could probably spend an entire podcast and get some policy folks on it. But again, my concern is that the initiatives are kind of going the wrong way. For example, there's a bill pending right now in California that would ban employment screening altogether. So no employment screening in the state of California. How awful would that be if you're an employer in the state of California? So there's a hearing next week on that. But, with California, we don't know where that's going to go. So, and I know we're all busy in our daily lives, but we got to really look at these things and hear what's going on and get active and make sure we speak up and know what's happening out there, because it's a little scary for sure.
Interesting. And okay, so for employers who want to do the right thing but who are concerned about, in some cases, things being overdone, or where there's sort of the discretion that's left to the employers, that's rope that's long enough to hang themselves and to find themselves in legal jeopardy and with liability down the road, all that sort of thing. In other words, where if you're looking for some way as an employer to represent a common sense view to these governmental entities. Do you have some suggestions for that? I'm wondering whether there is something like, on the outbound call center side, there's PACE, which is a nonprofit organization which does lobbying on behalf of people in that industry. In this case, would employers look to the Chamber of Commerce, the National Chamber of Commerce, and perhaps state and local chambers of commerce to help them out in terms of representing, a common sense viewpoint to these governments that are trying to have well-intentioned goals, but where the laws may in fact be a big problem for employers?
Yeah, that's some great points, Bruce. I think, I belong to the Professional Background Screeners Association, and we have active lobbyists that we work with, and I know we're active with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with the local chambers of commerce in different states. I know there's HR organizations like SHRM and others that folks can get involved with. It just depends kind of the business and the location and maybe where those laws are coming through of getting involved. There's another area we didn't mention, which I think might be an important thing for folks to walk away with today. And it's touching on background screening, but it's touching on the overall hiring process. And it's a hot topic right there in the news now is the use of artificial intelligence and AI. We've got to be really careful about that as employers. There was a recent lawsuit. Someone just sued, class action lawsuit against Workday, which is one of the big ATS systems, about the use of AI in hiring. And the EEOC and different government agencies right now are really looking at this area. They came out with guidance, and they say you, the employer, are responsible to know the software you're using. So say you have a resume vetting system you use, so you're getting thousands of resumes in, and it gives you back the 100 that fit your criteria. You better know the algorithm behind that. You're responsible as the employer. You can't just put it on the software provider. They're really looking at that during the hiring process. So that's a hot topic. And we just saw, like I said, the lawsuit just came out this past month against one of the big providers of HR kind of solutions for the hiring process. So be careful, and if you're using any of those, talk to your team. You might want to go back and go to your software providers and say, we need to understand the algorithm. I'll just give you a quick example of how it happened with one of our employers. It was a manufacturer, and they said, we left out a zip code because it just wasn't on the bus route, but it was a low-income neighborhood. They could have gotten in trouble, So it's different ways of looking at things. You don't mean to be discriminatory, but there might be something in the algorithm that's knocking some people out of that class. So got to be careful.
Wow. Okay. Christine, you are really up to date on all this stuff. A lawsuit that came out this past month that sounds very, very challenging to be able to keep up with, because if you're responsible for the software algorithms of the HR screening people that you use, wow. I mean, do I have that right, or am I overstating things?
Yeah, that's pretty much what the government's telling us, that you, the employer, you're responsible to know what systems you're using during the hiring process. So it's pretty scary because everyone's so busy, right? You're paying for software to help you out, to make yourself more efficient, to get it moving, and a lot of these companies don't want to tell you their algorithm. It's kind of their secret sauce. So it's definitely going to be another area that I see a big challenge for employers. It's not going to be a fun area, that's for sure.
No. It's certainly life is getting more complicated, and people will outsource specifically so that they don't have to concern themselves with some of these things. And now what we're saying is that, in fact, you do have to concern yourselves with it. So this is a very good heads up. Maybe not a welcome one, but a very good heads up, Christine, certainly. Well, boy, there's a lot to think about on this topic. Before we close, is there anything else our audience should be aware of before we wrap up?
I think we could probably talk an hour on all the topics that I brought up, but I would say, a couple of takeaways for you, right, is definitely, if you haven't, and maybe it's not your role, but make sure your company is reviewing the substance abuse policy and then also the background screening policy. And as I just mentioned with the AI situation, make sure any systems you're using to help the efficiency of your process of hiring, that you're understanding how that process works. I'd say those are the kind of the 3 top things, and especially if you're multi-state, I'm telling you right now, you got to look at each jurisdiction. Obviously it's not just with background screening and drug testing, it's all the employment laws, right? So if you're multi-state, you got to be really super careful. So those would be my kind of takeaways. If you took nothing else away today, if you walked away with that, I think we're successful.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Christine, for joining us, and I think we learned a lot. This was an information-packed session, and again, thank you very much. So do you have any final words, or should we turn things over to Alan to wrap things up?
Yeah, you can turn it over to Alan, or if you had any questions, happy to answer them. Okay,
no, I think you've answered all the questions that we have, and really appreciate your being on the show. So thank you very much. Alan, over to you.
Thanks again to Christine and Bruce for an insightful discussion on today's show. Be sure to join us next month for another great show, or look at our huge selection of archive shows on hot topics at BenchmarkPortal.com. Then click on the resources button and click on Call Talk, where you'll find over 14 seasons of this show. From all of us at Benchmark Portal, keep those headsets steady and your fingers ready. This is Alan Pockhotter signing out. Have a great day.